Please welcome Peter Meyers.
Thanks so much. I want to start by telling you about an ebook development project I recently spent some time working on. And I don't want to say too much about who the participants were, but let me call the publisher Random Penguin. The work in question was a novel. It's a really great story about an heiress to a button manufacturing empire. It's a woman named Betty who hits on the idea to sell customizable buttons. Turns out that Betty, since inheriting this multi-million-dollar but starting to dwindle business from her late dad, has devised a production process that uses a synthetic, heat-sensitive alloy that lets people manipulate buttons simply by squeezing them. It's a hit, this idea. But naturally, this being a novel, problems ensue. So there's competitive threats from China, parents who suspect kids who are going to turn these buttons into a secret messaging system, and of course, a love story involving Betty and a thumbless man who claims that his condition prevents him from ever having enjoyed the satisfaction of button closing, but who in reality harbors a very sinister secret. It's riveting stuff, the manuscript, which having been submitted to Random Penguin earlier this year, they decided they wanted to turn into an enhanced digital edition. Makes sense, right? Now, where things really get interesting is not so much in how the story plays out. I'm not going to ruin that, but rather in the design proposals the publishing team came up with. First one came from the author himself, whose name I'm not going to mention out of respect for a fellow writer. He wants to add illustrations of buttons anytime they get mentioned in the text. It's a great idea, right? Hearing that, the head of marketing starts talking about her notion that the buttons need to be interactive. She proceeds to list off a slew of ideas. She wants a feature that gives readers the ability to create their own buttons right inside the digital book, a collection of share this tools so that you'd be able to stick these teeny tiny icons onto every button and let readers post them up onto Twitter and Facebook, some way for readers to move the buttons, the ones created by the publisher, around on screen and enlarge them so they could see them up close. And then similarly, some kind of automated, pre-programmed element of the digital book so that without even doing anything, without the reader doing anything, the buttons would just kind of randomly start moving around the page. And she was really mesmerized by this. She would hold up her iPad and she'd say, with an iPad, people expect movement. So the book's editor pipes up next, and he starts ticking off a bunch of suggestions. Let's let the readers pick choose-your-own-adventure style plots from a bunch of different possible outcomes, maybe even a range of genres. So there'd be one version that beefs up the love story, there'd be a sci-fi version, there'd be a thriller, one with vampires. Then he also had another idea to add videos throughout the story, one showing the button manufacturing process, another giving a tour of Betty's neighborhood, and then another showing the chemistry at play each time a button's color changes. And lastly, a GPS tool showing each reader's current location. And the same for anyone else currently reading the book, and you'd layer this all on top of pins that show throughout the book where the plot is taking place. Finally, the interaction designer chimes in. He'd been quiet. He looks up from his iPhone and he says, let's add an Easter egg, a 7-finger gesture that if you spread your fingers like so, a new element in the plot would unfold, where it turns out that Betty's dad was not actually dead and moved the plot in an entirely new direction. He also described a kind of slide-out pane so that readers inside the book could tweet about what was happening. The app would auto-tag it, and then they'd also be able to see what other readers were commenting. So, I thought after hearing all this, it's a lot to unpack here. You know, I'm the guy who's writing a book about designing digital books, so I felt a lot of weight to sort of weigh in with my opinions. And this is what I told them. The single most important thing you can do when working on a digital publishing project is serve the reader, not the device. What you create, be it the words on the page, the art a designer draws, or the features that a programmer codes, should contribute to a better reading experience. If you've added something simply because the iPad or the Kindle Fire or EPUB 3 lets you do it, then you're just showing off. You're serving the device and not the reader. And in an age of information overload, at a time when readers have severely limited time and a seriously unlimited number of reading alternatives, any reading experience that doesn't do a good job of making book owners happy is going to get abandoned. So what exactly is this reading experience? I mean, there's a zillion different kinds of books out there, not just novels and biographies and memoirs and how-to manuals. On top of all that, even more and different species get cooked up all the time by authors and publishers and programmers. Mashups of public domain material, timelines turned into historical archive browsers, tales told on Twitter. The list is almost endless of the new forms that we're starting to see. At heart, though, it seems to me that there are fundamentally three kinds of reading experiences: immersive, instructive, and extractive. The first, immersive, is all about storytelling. It's about that singular state that we enter when an author grabs our attention. And we love it. We never want her to let go. We never want the story to end. The second, instructive, is all about teaching. It's when we need to learn how to use Photoshop or understand macroeconomics or figure out why our 3-year-old all of a sudden wants to eat cat food. We read these kinds of books because we want to learn. Third, extractive. Here we're in a kind of get in, get out mindset. Phone books, shopping catalogs, maps, dictionaries. It's reference material which we consult in order to go do something somewhere else. Now, of course, sometimes even within the same book, we shift between these different modes, moving from, say, an immersive biography to the extractive nature of its index. But these three states, immersive, instructive, extractive, are hugely useful mindsets that all of us, writers and publishers and editors, need to keep in mind when designing digital books. As we try to focus on serving readers rather than simply fiddling with technology, knowing the mindsets that we're trying to serve can help us decide which enhancements to include and which to leave out. So let's get back to Betty for a second and think about all those proposed features. The first lesson: readers want authors to drive. There's a reason that so-called interactive fiction never took off beyond a small group of hardcore fans. Most readers of long-form writing want someone else, the author, to do the hard work of storytelling. This goes back to the days of cave paintings and campfire stories, straight on through to bedtime books. You lose yourself in the land of the made-up precisely because you, the reader, don't have to make creative decisions. So for novels, my advice is no choose-your-own-adventure stuff, no build-your-own-buttons, no tap this to uncork that style plot twist. Let the story and the author do the work. Next big principle, the literal fallacy. This is about the notion that images and videos are always better than plain text alone. My question is, why and how do visual elements, moving and movable buttons, for example, help explain things better than text? Reminds me of a fiction workshop I was in as a young graduate student. The head of my program, Frank Conroy, pulls out a blank piece of white paper. He starts panning it around the room. He was doing this in response to a classmate of mine whose story had tried to depict a lover's quarrel, more or less by transcribing word for word a fight the guy had had with his girlfriend. Frank wasn't happy. Want your readers to feel like they're in a blizzard? Don't show them a blank page of white. Make the storm out of words. Frank's point, I think, works just as well today for what seems to me to be an overly literal-minded tendency currently flourishing in ebook land. It goes something like this. We've got a story about buttons, then by gosh, we need to show them buttons. No, the writer needs to make the buttons out of words. Same goes for adding in-book videos and links that point to websites written by other people. All this stuff pulls readers away from the text. Next, reading is solitary and sharing is social. Someday we may well get to the point where, as a friend of mine once claimed, she could compose poetry while watching TV, drinking wine, talking on the phone, and doing her nails. But in 2011, we're not there yet. We need to read alone, by ourselves, by paying close attention. Sharing what we like and seeing what others enjoy is great. We've been doing that ever since storytelling began, but we need that stuff to happen after and outside of the time that we spend in focused engagement with the text. And nowhere is this more important than at this very moment, when the clatter of smartphones and status updates is threatening to crowd out the quiet mental space that we need to enjoy books. Books are a refuge from the noise crowding out our cultural airwaves. And this isn't me being some precious English major. This is one businessman's advice to anyone in publishing who's wondering what it is that they're selling. It's not, of course, printed books. You're selling readers dedicated time with an author and with a story, especially in the case of those immersive and instructive mindsets that I was talking about earlier. So by all means, let readers share, but don't let their socializing intrude on their reading time. Help them stay connected to the story by keeping the page distraction-free. So to sum up my take on Betty, long-form narratives don't need any core enhancements beyond an author's polished prose. Adding in extra stuff, video, sounds, links, motion, not only doesn't improve these works, it isn't worth the extra development costs, it degrades and diminishes what your readers are coming to you for. I bet you 5 years from now, we'll look back and conclude that consumers weren't willing and weren't interested in paying extra for souped-up versions of the stories they're already enjoying. Text paints more powerful pictures in readers' minds than any image can. But that doesn't mean that new kinds of books aren't worth creating. It just means that we need to think about designing touchscreen content from the ground up rather than repurposing old material. And let's stop thinking about the best way to take public domain novels and turning them into apps. Instead, my suggestion is to think about how to service those reading experiences I talked about with content that takes advantage of our new touchscreen displays. So with that in mind, I want to show you 3 different examples of born digital works. I think all these do a great job of serving their audience in very different ways. For me, each of these are inspiring models. None of them are what we currently think of as books, but each show how books might look and work in the years ahead. First up, in a category I'll call Best Immersive Work, Vancouver's own Welcome to Pine Point. Its creators describe it as part book, part film, part family photo album. I'm nearly tempted to tell you to stop listening right now, ignore the rest of this talk, and just start watching. I won't be offended. It's that good. It's about a northern Canadian mining town that was shut down and emptied out in the late 80s. By combining text, audio, archival video, still photos, and animation, the team behind this, 2 guys named Paul Shoebridge and Michael Simons, working in conjunction with producers at the National Film Board of Canada, have woven together an entrancing, poignant, and thoroughly immersive piece. Incidentally, you can't watch it on an iPad. It's done, forgive me and may you be resting in peace, Steve Jobs, in Flash. So 4 things in particular I think they've done really well here. First, the author leads and the reader explores. The temptation to let readers sniff around for themselves and study what interests them is huge, especially in nonfiction. After all, the web gave us the thrill of wandering across its endless terrain, and who hasn't enjoyed that? But books are different. Part of their appeal, especially those that tell stories, is the way that they compose order out of chaos. The author's decision on what to include versus what to leave out is in a very literal sense authoritarian. It's an act that says, I have spent tons of time, I've pulled out lots of hair so that you, the reader, can enjoy a well-shaped story. The reading path they then present, in effect, says, here, have a look at this first, and then this, and then this. And similarly, these well-shaped creative productions contain a finite amount of material. This is huge in an age of information overload. For an audience dealing with a stress-inducing pile of ever-growing reading opportunities, any work that presents itself with a beginning, a middle, and an end offers readers a satisfying sense of accomplishment. That's something you can never, ever say about the web or about Twitter. What the Pine Point guys have done, in contrast, is design a linear, finite narrative that allows and encourages the reader on each screen to linger and explore. It's probably worth noting that Paul and Michael's background is as the design team behind Adbusters magazine, and I think it's interesting to think about the magazine format, as one that presents a limited amount of material within which readers are encouraged to sniff around and investigate what's most interesting to them, but they can always finish it. Anyway, in Pine Point, each screen presents a different mix of text, visuals, audio, and simple, easy to find previous and next buttons. On a typical screen like the one I'm about to show, what plays automatically is a bit of content, and then the viewer can explore further if he or she likes. Here, the first-person narrator, which is Mike, is writing about how he learned about the town of Pine Point by first discovering a memorial website that a former citizen had created. You click Next, and what appears is a kind of curated tour of the website on the left-hand side. You can read through the description surrounding the visuals just as you would in a print book. The text describes what you're looking at, and that scrolling image on the left-hand side of the page is actually a sort of an excerpt from the website itself. And then on the right side are photos that the reader can flip through. But readers never have to worry about, as we used to call it a decade ago, about getting lost in cyberspace. Here you're always in the book, and your next step is always clear. Click that next button on the right side of the screen. It's a perfect partnership between author and reader. Next, multimedia. Along with interactivity, this term has to be one of the most overused, vague, and in general, poorly thought out enhancements that readers have been subject to since the dawn of the CD-ROM. Usually it means cramming video onto a page otherwise filled with text and letting the reader decide when to click play. The real challenge, and something I think the Pine Point guys have done a great job on, is figuring out how to integrate a bunch of different media formats and thinking through why to add each one. So here are the ingredients they include at various points throughout their project. That background soundtrack that you might have been able to hear on my laptop functions as a kind of score, voice recordings, video clips, still photo, text, animations, still illustrations. And as you'll see in the next clip, these ingredients are combined to create a real visually pleasing collage, one that subtly makes clear what I call a reading path. That is, the order in which the authors, they kind of nudge you to take your first pass through the page, and then you're free from there to explore. So in this section, we're introduced to a few key personalities in the town. This is the title screen that opens the section. You click Next, and we move on to some brief commentary about yearbook photos and how they commemorate a very particular version of ourselves. And then we meet this woman named Kim.
My name is Kimberly Fedorov. I lived in Pine Point from 75 to 84. Naming a band's a tough thing to do. Fedorov just doesn't flow. And I wanted a name that would be kind of big. Kim Castle was a big-haired blonde figure. In a night, I usually... to 12 times, I would do a Madonna tribute.
So that's all, I did a screen capture of what you experience on the site, but that's all under the reader's control. When to launch the video, when to dismiss it, when to sit back and listen to the audio of Kim. And obviously the collage and scrapbook style layouts are consistent with the themes that the Pine Point guys are exploring. But my point here isn't so much that this particular design is what digital books will or should look like. It's that they've chosen a design that's consistent with the themes that they're exploring, and it's a design that weaves together in a really harmonious way a bunch of different media elements. They don't just present the audience with raw ingredients that say, in effect, go make your own meal. These guys are master chefs, and they combine, season, and present everything exactly how they think it should look. Finally, there's minimal interactivity in this. Everything isn't clickable, only the stuff that benefits from reader inspection. So this is a page of badges and pins that obscure the underlying text at the center of the screen, and the action required on the reader's part is obvious. Move the badges out of the way so you can read the text. I think there's also something in the act itself that's really fitting. Clearing the badges off the words is a kind of physical embodiment of the process of unearthing old memories. But for the most part, there's not a lot of clickable stuff in this production. And what is clickable is obvious, thereby reducing the anxiety people feel when they don't know what's interactive and what's there simply for looking at. The Pine Point guys even opted to forego one of the most tempting digital extras imaginable, a link to the memorial website that spawned the idea for this whole project in the first place. There is a link to it tucked at the very end in the credits, but the stroke of design genius is about knowing what to leave out. A link to that website risks launching viewers away from Welcome to Pine Point Land and out onto the wild web. Great books lead their audience through a tour of what an author wants to show them. And I think that's a big part of what Michael and Paul have done here. Next up, the winner of my Best Instructional Publication Award goes to Rails for Zombies. This is another web-based publication. And like Pine Point, it looks more or less nothing like a book, and yet for my money, it provides all the same core book-like services for people who are looking for instruction on this topic, the Rails programming environment. Don't worry, you don't need to understand any of that to understand what's going on here. It's organized into 5 parts, this tutorial, and it takes its audience from the basics of what Rails is through its rules and operations and gives them a chance to practice some of these concepts. What they deliver here is true multimedia, not simply a video crammed into a written tutorial or tucked at the back of a chapter. Everything here is integrated. So you get, as you can see in this screenshot, a video of the instructor who's standing in front of what amounts to a souped-up whiteboard, which is what you see over his right shoulder. And check out what's up on there. Not just a stripped-down listing of the code that he's explaining, but it's all nicely formatted. The variables are colored different from the values, making it easier for viewers to read. And there's that handwritten commentary sloping off to the right, pointing out a special aspect of the code that he wants the students to focus on. Now, it might not seem like a big deal, a bit of handwriting superimposed on some electronic text. But it turns out that breaking up monotonous computerized text with bits of highly personalized writing, even little twists like angling the text in the way a teacher might do on a real whiteboard, all these little effects help teachers engage and explain more effectively to students. So the heart of what they've done a great job here is integration. Not just dumping everything into one book file, but really thinking through what the video is good for, what text does well, and what little flourishes like personal handwriting is good for. They also let students practice what they're learning about. So after a viewer has watched the video tutorial, he can get a chance to try out the concepts by clicking on the Start Level button in the lower right corner. That takes him to a page where the developers have actually built a mini web programming environment. Students get to write code, press the submit button, and see if it does what they want it to. And then basic feedback from the system appears at the top of the screen, letting them know whether they got things right or whether there's things they need to work on. It's a really powerful learning tool. Last, the winner of what I call my Best Extractive Reading Experience Award goes to an iPad app called History of Jazz, an interactive timeline. This app is it's beautiful to look at, it's a lot of fun to play with, and it rewards jazz fans in a way that no book, digital or print, ever could. At heart, it's a timeline built around a bundle of photos, YouTube clips, and iTunes song previews for about 100 different artists, each grouped according to the genre they represent. And then republished Wikipedia articles provide background for each performer. The timeline itself operates as a kind of 2-tiered structure. Tucked at the bottom of the screen is a xylophonish looking thing, and each genre shoots up like a piston as you touch it. And then on the top is where you find the main attraction. It's the heart of the collection. Everything here is traversable as you swipe the screen horizontally in either direction. Fans are never more than a tap or two away from some kind of treat. iTunes links to Sidney Bechet albums, Billie Holiday videos, and so on. Browsing is the main event here. It's not something you do in order to find an entry point into a larger narrative. Think of it like tapas rather than full-course dining. And so what are some of the key things they're doing right here? First, curation as editorial production. The publisher, it's a California-based firm called 955 Dreams, has produced very little original content here. Aside from a little bit of headline writing and some blurbs, the only thing they did, is the program and design work. But for the actual content, the music, the videos, they turned to free stuff online. iTunes and its embeddable song clips, Wikipedia, YouTube, and a bunch of public domain repositories for the images. The publisher's contribution was all about curation, going through the mountain-sized heaps of free stuff and picking a collection that ultimately is more valuable to readers than simply Googling a term like history of jazz. Next, I'd argue that what they've created isn't so much a history book as it is a magnificently browsable shopping catalog. At the heart of this app are those song previews that they pull in from iTunes. Here are a few of the ones that you get in the Billie Holiday section. All the other stuff, the videos, the pictures, the Wikipedia articles, all those are appetite-whetting shopping lures. They get users excited about what they're exploring. The app gives fans a simple way to top off or build up a jazz collection. Finally, think about the way that this whole catalog is presented. Nowhere in the entire app will you find anything resembling a print page. This thing didn't start out as some kind of print production which got disassembled and then rebuilt into an iPad app. It's very much a born digital product. And the designers make that point clear by organizing the material around a navigational tool, the timeline, that's really conducive to touchscreen control. You can't quite appreciate the beauty of the layout on the slides, but it's really a lot of fun to play with, and it's a great way to get people exploring big jazz collections. So, 3 projects that give you a taste of what, to me, feels like the future of enhanced digital books. If we leave the poor, plain textbooks alone and spend our time, money, and creative energy making stuff like this, my bet is that readers will reward us by buying both. Thank you very much. I also wanted to leave some time in case anyone has any questions about any of these examples that I shared, or the principles I touched on, or any of this stuff.
Could I ask,
Sure.
have you seen mechanisms like this where the publisher or the creator of the site or the enhanced book, where they're building it to receive a revenue stream from the referral or the agency in those situations?
Well, History of Jazz is a perfect example. It's really easy to set up these refer links for the iTunes songs, and they get a cut of all the purchases that anybody makes when using the app. Is that? Yeah, so that's really easy to do. Apple makes it easy, Amazon makes it easy with anything that they sell. Most e-commerce retailers have some system in place for the kind of referral fees, and I think it's a very obvious opportunity for publishers to start thinking about that as a new revenue source.
Have you seen some other great examples of that in a pure text form?
Not as a class, not as what I think we would collectively think of as a digital book product. I mean, obviously, I think I can think of websites that frequently put these affiliate links on, but not in books. But I'm sure there are. I just can't think of anything off the top of my head.
An example of one, Grace
And you're also reminding me of Random House did a memoir last year from the rapper Jay-Z called Decoded, and in that they also have ways to sort of buy songs from within the digital book.
On the subject of revenue streams, we're used to in regular paper magazines seeing ads in there that help support the publishing costs, and we're used to seeing them on various blogs, but not so much in paper books. What are your thoughts, whether it's a good idea or a bad idea to include ads in
I think it's a great idea, with the caveat being that you really need to think about the particular genre. You know, I think fiction it's an awful idea. I think, again, you're selling a product whose main appeal is the immersive, stop thinking about the real world kind of environment that an author is creating. But for things like how-to books, cookbooks, I think it's not only a place where, you know, publishers can start making money. I think they can start providing value for consumers. I mean, think about in the world of, say, consumer electronics, how much sort of stress people go through trying to figure out which, whatever, external USB drive to buy. I mean, the publisher could be adding, you know, a kind of roster of advertisers that they've vetted into a how-to book that would sort of straddle the editorial content that they're providing. So I think it's a great idea overall. I just think it needs to be done. You know, and even as I say that fiction doesn't make sense, I think a well-considered selection of ads, I mean, I'm thinking of things like publications like the New York Review of Books, or, you know, sort of high-end literary supply manufacturers. I mean, those all appropriately placed, I think, in the beginning and the end, as long as they're not disrupting the reading experience, seem to feel like they make sense.
So the three examples you showed are really amazing to see as end products. It's a little hard, you know, thinking about a traditional writing process, to extrapolate back and imagine the bolt of inspiration that led to each one. And I'm wondering if, as you've looked at these kinds of projects, if you've been able to develop any insights about the creative process that allows the vision to kind of emerge.
Yeah, well, I spent a lot of time talking to Paul and Michael to start with, and they originally began Welcome to Pine Point as a print book to explore the study of the death of, or the end of, scrapbooks in the digital age. So that was their idea, and they were going to write a book about it. And I think they, you know, this really is a great example of what happens as authors and creative people really start getting into the material. You know, they started thinking about that topic and feeling like they couldn't do it justice in print, or put another way, they could tell a much richer story if they started to incorporate some digital tools. Now, it is interesting. When I originally met them for the first time, I had this sort of, I had imposed a kind of halo around them, and I'm like, you guys are creative design geniuses, and you know Flash. I mean, there's like 6 people in the world who can, you know, design in this way and also program. And they kind of sheepishly said, well, we actually don't know anything about Flash. I mean, and I'll be very honest, and I'm not giving away any secrets, they got the grant from the National Film Board, and they got teamed up with programmers who built what, you know, very honestly, is something on the order of magnitude of hundreds of thousands of dollars production. You can't do this cheaply. What I think it does show, while the costs will definitely come down as these tools become easier to use, it shows that I think more of the books and the digital projects that we're all going to be working on are going to be collaborative enterprises. I mean, the novel that's, you know, plain text and 100,000 words will, for the next, you know, 100 years, be a solitary undertaking. But anything like this needs to start bringing in designers and programmers. So I think that's going to be interesting to see how that kind of group approach starts changing the creative output. But maybe to kind of get back to your question, I think that, you know, I think it's going to be a matter of finding authors who are visual thinkers, you know, who can think about things like what, some of these examples. And in many cases, the people who are, seasoned and polished wordsmiths will be fine just sticking with regular prose. All right, I think that's it. Well, thanks again for your time.